If you were born between 1930 and 1946, then you are, whether you like it or not, a one percenter. What do you think of that? Stay tuned to find out what that means. Welcome to Nanny and the Moose, my friends. Happy New Year. And I have a rabbit hole story today. Well, it's not a rabbit hole story. It's just a wonderful idea to something to talk about today that is going to bring back memories to you. And it's such an important part of history. You, my friends, are one of the rare one percenters of this very special group and the very last generation to retain these unique memories that no one else has. This particular story came in an email to my hubby yesterday, and it came from a friend that he grew up with from the time he was a little boy, and they remain friends to this day. Actually, Andy was in our wedding. They went to school together. They've seen each other on and off. Andy still lives back in New Jersey, down at the shore. Well, Andy found this article, and I don't know where it was, but it was the most fascinating article. I've read these things before, but it mentioned so many memories that I'm going to mention a few of them. And by the way, if you have memories that I've not mentioned, and there's going to be a million that I can't just talk about today, do tell me in your comments. And I know this is going to be one of those fun videos. Now, let's start back when we were little. I remember during the war, my father having a victory garden. That's what they called them, because certain foods just were not available at that time. We didn't know any better as kids. When my mom sent me to school with a sandwich with sandwich bread on it, remember that, kind of like mayonnaise with little pickles in it? That was it. I remember meals of potatoes kind of cut up and an egg or two mixed in with it. Actually, I loved that meal. Many meals where we didn't have meat, and sugar and butter were just not available. As a matter of fact, I remember when I was probably maybe 7, maybe less, maybe younger than 7, about 7 in the morning, my mother would send me up to a line on the outside of the Safeway. Now, we could walk from our house in Bloomfield, New Jersey, to the little small shopping area. And my mother would send me to get online. The lines were blocks long, and she'd give me the ration book that had a coupon for a pound of sugar or maybe a pound of butter. I don't even think butter might have been available, because I do remember that bag of lard. And in that bag of lard, remember it was called what, Moose?
Margarine.
Margarine, but I think it had the name Oleo margarine.
Oreo.
And it had a little tiny red, like a pill. And my job was to squeeze that lard until the pill had softened and had gone through it to make it look like butter and be yellow. What did we know? Well, you know what? To this day, I can't eat margarine. I do know that. I'm a butter girl, that's for sure. What else do I remember? Playing out in the dark, just in the summertime, and not worrying about being afraid of anything. The parents weren't afraid of letting us play out alone. Walking to school, walking home from school. I used to get on a trolley. Now, in Bloomfield, down on Bloomfield Avenue, and I'm sure that the trolley tracks are gone by now. Are they, ladies? Those of you who still live in Montclair and Bloomfield? I remember going down to Newark with my friend Merrill, and she and I must have been 10 or 11. Mom didn't worry about me going alone with my friend on the trolley all the way to Newark. She would give me $5, which was a lot of money in those days. And I would come home, I'd go to Kresge's basement. Remember Kresge's? I think there might have been a Bamberger's down there in Newark too. And we would even have lunch. We could do so much for $5. And I would come home with a few little things. I remember once I came home with a little sundress from Kresge's basement. And just some of the things that we look back on. Now, I know that one of the big things was the TV. Now, I must have been maybe 10 or 11 when one of the little boys in our neighborhood, Danny Johnson's mom, won a TV at the church raffle. And it was a TV that stood on was a big box, and it had antennas. Remember the antennas? And the screen must have been no bigger than 10 inches. And everyone in the neighborhood, there were a lot of kids in the neighborhood because we played outside all the time, knew all the kids in the neighborhood. No being driven to a friend's house for a play date or whatever. You played outside all day, all night. We had so much that children today don't have. On the other hand, children today have so much that we didn't have and probably didn't even need. And we were invited to Danny's house almost every day. Mrs. Johnson was the loveliest woman, and she would set up card table chairs in rows of all the little kids that would come to watch the TV, which did not go on in those days until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Remember that? And now I'm 87, so maybe a lot of you don't remember that far back.
Duty.
What? Oh, Howdy Doody. But TV didn't start till 4 in the afternoon.
Captain Video.
And it was always Westerns for some reason or other.
Hopalong Cassidy.
Well, Mosey's remembering Hopalong Cassidy, Roy Rogers, Gene Autry. I mean, we could probably name the horses. What were the horses' names, Moose?
George,
No.
Harry, and Pete.
Sorry. Anyway, we watched those, anything. We didn't care. We just were fascinated because all our lives up to that point, we listened to the radio, and we would have to imagine the stories that were told on radio. I also remember very much sitting around with our whole family. The radio boxes were big boxes that sat on the floor, like a big television would have been in those days. And we would sit as a family and listen to various programs, all before TV. Now, I don't remember when we got our TV ourselves, but I know it was before I was 13, because at 13 we moved to Montclair, and then I started high school in Montclair. And we either walked or sometimes we took a bus by ourselves, but never did Mom ever drive us back and forth to school. Then you are part of a very special remaining group of people who remember coming out of a world war, who remember growing up without a TV, maybe eventually a little tiny 10-inch black and white TV that wasn't on in the daytime. You remember so many things. This article mentions so many things that I almost had forgotten, that I'm going to read some of them that are on this screen. One of them was, do you remember in school, we were encouraged to save tinfoil and gum wrappers and various other little things that they would collect in our classrooms and then send them off to, I don't know who they were sent to, but they were sent to the factories to make ammunition and whatever for the soldiers who were fighting over in Europe at that time. And some of these things said, do you remember milk being delivered? Now, in our house our first house that we bought was 70 years old. And in the back hall, there were some little stairs that went down to a little tiny back hall with a door to the outside. And right next to that door was an iron door that said milk on it. and you'd open it up and it was a little box, and the milkman would put your milk. He'd come around to the back of your house and he would put your milk in there for you. Your milk was actually delivered every morning. Now, I do remember that, that's for sure. Oh, what else? Parents would discipline us, that's for sure. We were very heavily disciplined. We were very respectful and did respect our parents in those days, that's for sure. We were the last generation who spent our childhood without television, of course, and we did imagine what we heard on the radio. We talked about that. And we played outside day and night, not worrying about anything. There was no Little League at that time. I remember also years later when we were living up in the Danville area of San Francisco, I remember the very first soccer league was started. I forget the name of the man. He was a famous man who started soccer, and our boys started playing soccer for the first time. So some of these leagues were eventually started for the kids. We had 3 stations on our TV in the late 40s, and daytime it was just snow and no remotes, and those bunny ears were always going wacky, and you had to kind of adjust them every once in a while. And I remember we had a man by the name of Mr. Reichman. Actually, his daughter Gail was one of my lifelong buddies. I went to school with Gail from kindergarten all through high school. And Mr. Reichman was the TV man. He'd come with his little box, and he would come in and change the tubes in the back of the TV when things were going wonky. And very often, Mr. Reichman would have to come to the house. By the way, I also remembered the insurance man coming to the house every month. And my parents would sit down at the dining room table and make their payment or whatever. That was something that just popped into my mind. Let's see, what else? Telephones. Oh boy, weren't telephones fun? We had one telephone in the house, and it hung on the kitchen wall. And it was a party line. I think we had 4 people on our line. And if many's the time you'd pick up that phone and you would hear other people talking. It was not something that you would tell your secrets about, because other people were always listening. Well, as kids, of course, we would get into a lot of trouble by doing things, saying things to people on the phone and everything at that point. Or if they were talking too long, we'd cut in and we'd say, could you please hang up? We have a very important call to make. But that's what. Then we have the telephone operators with the plugs that they would stick in these walls. What advances technology has made. I remember in the 50s flying in a prop jet. Now, they did start commercial jets in the 60s, early 60s, but they weren't available to many people, and they were very expensive. So were the flights, comparatively speaking, to even these short flights. My mother flew to California to visit her mother, who had moved out there in the late 40s. And she took my brother Tommy, who was a baby at the time. And I remember her trip on a prop jet. It was early 50s, took 15 hours or something to fly from New Jersey to California. Let me see what else. Typewriters. Remember the old typewriters, the black ones? You had to learn to type, which, by the way, I never did learn to type. I was always a 2-finger typer. But you had to pound those, and when things went wrong, you had to change the ribbons and everything. Eventually, we had electric typewriters, but I don't think people have typewriters anymore, that's for sure. Newspapers and magazines were written for adults, and the news was broadcast on your radio every evening. Let's see. Oh, comic books. Do you remember comic books? Oh, my heavens. I remember when we were sick, and that morning when you would get to stay home from school and stay in bed. I remember after my mother would drive my father to the train station every morning, he would go into New York and worked in New York and then take the train back. My mother picked him up every night. We only had one car. And by the way, one bathroom in a big house that had a basement, a first floor, a second floor, and an attic. No matter how many kids you had, Moosey's had 6 kids in his family, and you had one bathroom. There might have been a bathroom down in the basement, but nobody ever wanted to go down there. Let's see, what else?
That's where you read your comics.
Oh, my comics. The comics, Mom would come home with a couple of comics, and I think they were Blondie and what else? I remember I did have favorite comics. I can't remember them now.
Donald Duck.
Oh, well, Donald Duck, of course. It wasn't one of my faves.
Superman.
But Superman, of course. Those are the guy ones. But all these things that we had that kids today don't have. But then again, what do the kids have, as we know? And I'm not going to go through that we didn't have. Your parents were suddenly freed from the confines of the Depression and the war, and they threw themselves into working very hard to make a living for their families. The radio networks expanded from 3 stations to thousands during that time. And eventually, of course, when TV came in, I don't know what happened. People still listen to the radio, but our entire world was overflowing with plenty of opportunity and food. And we were over the rationing and the victory gardens. I think my father still continued that. And as a matter of fact, he was an avid gardener and had the most beautiful peonies that he grew every year. I always remember that. We felt very secure in our future, although the depression and the poverty were very deeply remembered. We came of age in the 50s and the 60s. We are the generation, the last generation, to experience an interlude where there were no threats to our homeland. Now think about that. That's something, isn't it? Only our generation can remember a time after World War II when our world was secure and full of bright promise and plenty. So far as health goes, I remember getting a vaccination by my Uncle Tom, who was a doctor at the time, and I got it on my leg, and I still have a scar that big. I had to wear a big plastic thing over it to let it breathe. That was a big thing. And polio was rampant during the time when we were children. In fact, we knew people who were paralyzed by polio. Eventually, we were still very young. I think Moosey and I were married and had a couple of little tiny kids. This was in the 60s when the cure for polio, we had to take these little sugar lumps with the cure. What would be the name for it? I don't know. And I think we had to take 3 doses, and then eventually polio was cured. And then eventually vaccinations came in. But we had every disease. We had the chicken pox, the mumps, the measles, whooping cough, everything in those days. The article goes on to say that we were the 1%ers, and more than 99% of us are retired now. And not many of us are still here. So it would be really interesting if some of this knowledge could get passed on. I wish that history was something that more children were interested in. I think a lot of people felt that history was not the subject that they got the most fun out of it. I remember when Matthew was in high school, he said that history came alive to him, and I always remember this because of a teacher that he had that made, and it was somewhere around junior year, maybe it was senior year, and that particular teacher had such a way about him or a love for history that he was able to put this love of history into kids that normally were bored by history. And my theory is that I think a lot of people don't enjoy history per se because it's a bunch of facts about our world and this and that. And only if you personalize your history and put yourself in that time way back then, would you perhaps enjoy that time and only have it come back to you in your memories. So I hope you spend some time perhaps going through some of these little episodes in your life of your history. There's so much more that I could talk about, and stories that I could tell, and I'm sure you could too. So if you get a chance to sit down with your grandkids, tell them about some of these instances. You know, some of my grandkids, when they heard that we didn't have something, or we didn't do this, or we didn't do that, I remember they were absolutely shocked at some of the things that we did do or didn't do, for that matter. I did a little short just a while ago, and as a matter of fact, I'm losing my light here. I forgot to mention something that in my last video, when I was going through all the different gifts that the children had given us, Micah and Colleen, and I'm looking at it off to the side here, gave me a light because Mike is in the business. He's an anchor man on television. He said, lighting is everything, Nanny. Overhead lighting is terrible, like I have in the kitchen. And I always notice that, because overhead lighting, the bags show up under your, no, never go under overhead light, Micah says. So they gave me a light that's square like this. And I used it in the last video, but I think I had it on too high, because I noticed that the brightness sort of took away features in my face. But that I'm going to learn to put on the next light down. And see, right now I just have a table lamp, a soft one on, and it's getting dark outside. But I wanted to tell you that our New Year's Eve was wonderful. No, we did not do fondue. So those of you, a couple of ladies had said, oh, I was looking forward to your little supper that you do every year. I think we did it 4 years in a row in the living room with the fondue. But one of them said, but I can go back and watch those instead. Well, we did a charcuterie board. And I took a picture of it before we dug in, and we had the charcuterie board in our bedroom. Well, I've just finished making up our charcuterie board, and I have an array of things for our New Year's Eve supper, including some red grapes, some wine cheddar, salami, more wine cheddar, crackers. These are little crisp, oh, I don't know what you call these, but these are crispy, and they're like edamame, crispy edamame. All kinds of cheeses. Here is Monterey Jack spicy. This is some provolone. This is prosciutto. And I have some shrimp that we're going to open up, dipped in marinara. We'll have that. I also have 2 kinds of herring. I think we're ready to dig in. I did have little smoky, tiny hot dogs, but I think I'm going to save those for tomorrow, because we will continue this tomorrow. I have our nice warm bedroom fireplace going. It's very warm here in the bedroom. And I think this is where we'll probably have our supper. I started to tell you, I did a short just a little while ago while it was still light outside about this little article that Moosey's friend Andy sent. And by the way, when I was just getting ready to start this video, Andy called. And so he has to call Andy back, because I wanted to do this video. But I thought that this article was so exciting when I looked at it that I wanted to talk to you about it. And I'm anxious to hear a lot of your comments. So do tell me what you feel, what you remember from those days. And I'm sure there'll be some that we can all relate to. Thanks so much for watching everything. It's been a great year, and I certainly hope that we can still come up with some subjects and something of value that I can give to all of you in so many ways, and that we all, no matter what age we are, have a very healthy, happy, prosperous 2025. Love you all. See you soon. Bye for now, and God bless us all.